for the Coal Combustion Products Program at The Ohio State University. Dr. Bhutalia is a research associate professor at the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering. His technical specialty is characterization of natural and synthetic materials and their use in environmentally benign commercial applications. Dr. Bhutalia, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back in Bombay after 30 years. I got my master's here from IIT Bombay, and so it is nice to come back. And on the drive in from the airport, I noted how cleaner the city has become. And so I really look forward to the presentation that was yesterday at lunchtime, looking at IIT Bombay as one small community in which that can work together to make a real difference in terms of thinking globally and finding solutions locally. A great example of that. The presentation should be coming up here in just a moment. Thank you. If you could have the lights up here turn down just this chandelier during the presentation, I would appreciate that. This particular presentation looks at the beneficial uses as well as disposal of residues that come from coal. And so the focus is on coal combustion residues. My co-author here on this presentation is Dr. Shiv Dubey, who's up here in the second row. He used to work for NTPC, which manages lots and lots of power plants here in the United States, and currently works with Terry on several different issues. So this is a cross-cultural presentation between the US and Indian agencies from a research and technology perspective. So what are these materials? Coal combustion residues are what are generated after the coal is burned, and as a result, you're left with different types of residues that you have. The predominant ones that you see here are primarily fly ash and FGD material. In the United States, we produce, because we have high sulfur coals along with low sulfur coals, we do a lot of scrubbing. And so we produce a lot of the FGD material as well as fly ash. Here in India, we have large amounts of fly ash that are generated because Indian coals have much higher ash content than many of the US coals. And we see increasing amounts of the FGD or the flue gas desulfurization materials also being generated here in India, increasing as you go along. So the one at the bottom will become important as we go along. These are some of the applications that I myself, working at the Ohio State University, and many of my other colleagues at the university who worked on. The ones that are marked in red are the ones that we have focused on. The one in particular I want to bring your attention to is the one at the bottom on the right, which is mining applications. Because that's one of the high volume uses that is available for these materials. And we will look at technologies that I would say are, obviously we want to have technologies that are high value and high volume. But very few benefit technologies fit that category. So then you have high value, low volume, or low value, high volume. And I'll come to that as I go through my presentation. This is just a blurb about our program. Many of you on your seat or the seat next to you will have an index card that talks about the OSU Coal Combustion Products Program, which was established nearly 2 decades ago by the industry as well as state and the federal government to promote what I call, if you see up here, is the technically sound, environmentally benign, and commercially competitive uses. In the end, this is a three-legged stool. A beneficial use will sustain itself as long as these three to begin with are in concert with each other. And the fourth one we found that gets added to this is over time, these beneficial uses have to be socially acceptable. So those are the key components of sustaining the technology for beneficial use for these materials. Over the last 20 years, we've had many research demo projects totaling about over 20 million, and this is only possible by working with multiple partners, particularly the utilities and the ash industry. And so we've had a lot of success with this program. I'm sorry you can't see the graphics that come up here. Isn't all that great, but I'll summarize some of these numbers for you for the United States. What you see up here is the the production data on the left-hand side for all coal combustion residues generated in the US, which goes all the way up to 2015. And what you'll find is that the production levels that you see, this is the dark blue line on the extreme right that you would have, and you can see that the total production is about 100 million tons. And of that, about half, which is the light blue line, about 50% is currently utilized in the United States. If you look at just fly ash, that is the figure here to the right. Again, if you look at the same lines all the way to the right, you find the same thing. That almost half of the fly ash that's generated in the US is beneficially used, primarily in cement and concrete applications. I'll skip this particular slide and I'll go directly to the scenario here in India in terms of use, and then talk about what are the pathways forward, because this conference we're looking at how can we now move a step further and make a significant difference. I already touched upon the challenge that is there, is that Indian coals have much higher ash content. In fact, Mr. Lobo was telling me this number I have here of 45% can even go up to 50 and sometimes even occasionally more. So very high, large amount of ash is generated per ton of coal that is burned. So what I've got up here is a graph that you can see in terms of generation. As some of you may remember, the fly ash mission was established in 1994, 1995, and I remember coming to their very first conference, which is further, this is 96, 97. So I've been engaged in fly ash scenario here for quite some time. You can see that in the early 1990s, you had about 70 million tons of fly ash was generated here in India, and very little, if any, was actually beneficially used. And then if you look at the gradual increase that has happened, both in the production as well as beneficial use. And then if you look at all the way to the right, for the data that CEA has provided for 2015-2016, you can see that about 180 million tons of fly ash was generated in that year in India, and of that, if you look at the number that's beneficially used, is a little more than 100 million tons, which is a significant progress. So what I want to suggest is that this is not trivial. What this tells me is that this is very, very intentional. You cannot get from here to there with simply saying, well, we'll see what happens. And so there is a strategy that's in place that has helped us move in this direction. The question that comes up is the survey that was done last year included 150 power plants across India and looks at the megawatts that they produce. And they talked about 180 million tons were generated, and of that, a little more than 100 million tons of fly ash was used. The ash content average is about 33%, with a utilization rate of 60%. So one good news is the percent utilization in India, in fact, is better than the United States. So we have something we also can learn from how things operate and work here in India. The one thing I want to focus on is look at the market segments. Look at where are these uses happening, and that will help us then move in a direction of where the future pathways are. And so I've got a little pie chart here that looks at essentially cement and concrete, mine filling applications. You've got bricks, tiles, blocks is another market, and reclamation of low-lying areas. So I'll focus on each of them separately as I go along. But these are the market segments. If you look at the first six, these six put together pretty much account for the very largest amount of beneficial use. And if you look at 7 through 10, they are minuscule amounts. So let me talk about each of those. And as I do this, at the bottom I talked about the high volume, high value uses. Then you have high volume, low value, and then low volume and high value. And so we've got to keep in mind that not all, not all fly ash is the same, not all beneficial uses are the same. So let's first look at the largest one, the cement industry and in concrete. This is the use of fly ash as a pozzolan, both in the manufacture of cement as well as in concrete. But this does require good quality fly ash. A fly ash that has high amounts of unburned carbon cannot necessarily be used and has to go through a modification process that needs to happen. This accounts for about 40% of all fly ash use. And this particular use is a high volume and high value use. And for that reason, our next presentation, Mr. Lobo, that follows from me, will exclusively deal with this particular topic. In India currently, the use of fly ash in cement manufacture is quite common. However, its use in concrete applications to replace cement has not taken off as much. And I think there are different market incentives that play. Many power plants still handle fly ash wet. You've got to be able to move away from wet handling to dry handling, and once you have the dry fly ash, you've got to separate the good from the bad. So you've got to have silos in which you can store good quality fly ash that actually can be used for concrete applications. The second one is what I call structural fills. And these are essentially for roads, embankments, as well as ash dikes. These are large volume users. They are low volume. And if you look at the bottom here, it's about 15 million tons per year, or about 15% of the total ash use comes from this category. Now this particular one, the market, as you can see, the figures on the right-hand side, the beneficial use, the blue line at the bottom, has pretty much stabilized out. And this is one area in which one can see increases, but they pretty much are those uses that are in-house, that are done by the power plant themselves. The power plants can use them for ash dikes that need to be prepared, for embankments and roads in the vicinity of the power plant itself. So we will see increases here, but only within the utilization in-house of the power plant itself.
Keep it down.
Just take it down if you could. They know our names, so be good. Thank you. So why don't we move this table and bring it down there? Or after my presentation, they can do that. Let's next go to mindful. This particular application is one that has the most amount of potential for volume increases in India. And this is both in terms of open cast mines as well as underground mines. And this is more of a cradle to grave approach because you have the coal that's coming from the mine and its used at the power plant, and it would seem to make sense to take some, if not a lot, of the ash that's generated back into the place where it came from. So this has this holistic approach that can work. And about 10% of all fly ash use currently is here. The advantage here is you can use both low and high carbon fly ash, what I call good and poor quality from a concrete perspective, can be utilized in these applications. And the place where this has the most amount of potential is at what we would call pit head plants here in India, or mine moth operations. In fact, in the US, in mine moth operations, this is the standard practice today. The key issue here is one of transportation. To promote this use, the transportation issue becomes the key. And Dr. Dubey, who's here, has been working on behalf of Terry and his NTPC to be able to similarly power plant ash for the recommended Borby mine. And he's found out that the transportation of the ash from the power plant to the mine is the critical or the defining issue, or the nut that has to be cracked for this to be successful. In terms of building products, bricks, blocks, and tiles, again, about 15% of it is utilized. And this one in particular has a potential for those power plants that are within urban areas or close by. That would say within about 100-kilometer radius. So that's where the largest increase would happen in the urban areas that you would have. This particular application, I will give you my bias on it, okay? Is reclamation of low-lying areas. What I can tell you is if I were to put this up in the US, I would pretty much get shot down the first 30 seconds because low-lying areas typically have a lot of water, groundwater. And so the concern I have with these kinds of applications is that if you put the material down where there's already groundwater, the chances of contamination or the risk are probably the highest. And this market, again, in India pretty much hasn't taken off, and for good reason that you see, the blue line at the end, and that's pretty much stabilized, but the leaching of trace elements is what one would be most concerned about for these applications. And then the last one I want to touch upon is agricultural uses. I want to be really clear that the use of fly ash is a soil amendment, it's not a fertilizer. Now, there are folks who will peddle, and I use the word peddle very, very intentionally. They will try to peddle to you with that and will imply that fly ash is a fertilizer. No, it is not. It is a soil amendment, and the amount is about, you can see, about 2 million tons per year. It's a low volume and low value use, and not so much of an increase is expected out there. And then I'll go directly to my last slide, on the pathways forward. There is a current requirement that is going on that in India, you've got to be able to come up with 100% ash utilization by the end of this year. Friends, that's not happening. We know that, okay? So this will get extended just like this new date was. But here's the good news. About 1/3 of all power plants, 50 or 150 in India, have already achieved 100% utilization. You got good news. The problem is down here. About 1/3 plants have a lot more progress to make. And my suggestions below deal with that in particular, how to increase these units. First one is to convert the units that still handle ash wet to dry handling, as well as provide silos for storage so the ash can be used for high valued application like cement and concrete and others and products. The second is the in-house use for infrastructure development, which are roads, ash dikes and others. And I talked about transportation being a key issue. Yes, currently there's a requirement that subsidy be done by the power plant within 100 kilometers, maybe even 300. And friends, that will work well in the initial development of the market. But after 5 or 10 years, this has to be a commercially competitive entrepreneurial thing to work. It will not work if there's external requirements of what needs to be done. And I've talked about the 3 ones in red I've already covered in my presentation, for mindful in one. And the last one I'll touch upon is that a lot of utilities have a lot of fly ash that is in landfills and in ash ponds. And at some point, not now, 15, 20, 30 years, that ash will have to be dealt with. It would either have to be, the ash pond would have to be reclaimed, either in situ, but over time, as natural resources become more and more scarce, those ashes could then be beneficiated and modified for other applications. And friends, with that, I would stop at this time and just talk about one comment at the bottom. And I think this is extremely important. The coal industry, I think, I can speak at least for the United States. Now, I don't know if this is true in here, and Mr. Lobo and McKnight can talk about that, was very content saying we satisfy all local, state, and national regulation. So everything is good. Well, not in the US anymore. We've got to make sure that we don't have what we call systematic failures, things we have not planned for, in which you would have environmental releases. So, thank you so much, and as the chair of the session, I want to make sure I'm respectful of the time, so thank you.